It goes by legend that in 1914, Ernest Shackleton placed an advertisement in a London newspaper seeking men to join him on an expedition to Antarctica. The ad reputedly read, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success." While there's actually no evidence this ad ever existed, it is true that thousands of men applied for the expedition. They certainly didn't apply for the pay or the healthcare benefits. They applied for the expedition because of something innate and deep in the human psyche, the desire for challenge and adventure. Let's take a look at the psychology of challenge, why we need it, and what it does for us. A life without sufficient intentional challenge is one that quickly becomes challenging itself. When you avoid difficulty at every corner, you eventually end up coming face to face with it. The budding entrepreneur who keeps thinking about starting a business but is too risk averse to actually take the first step will eventually need to deal with the pain of regret, which is a challenge in itself. The person who desires to lose weight but avoids the challenge of cutting food intake and exercising will deal with the pain of poor health, a challenge in itself. In other words, you cannot avoid challenge, but you can intentionally embrace challenge to lead yourself closer to the life that you want. As the old saying goes, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. To understand why challenge is important, we need to understand the difference between pleasure and enjoyment. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi in the book Flow writes, "When people ponder further about what makes their lives rewarding, they tend to move beyond pleasant memories and begin to remember other events, other experiences that overlap with pleasurable ones, but fall into a category that deserves a separate name: enjoyment." Enjoyable events occur when a person has not only met some prior expectation or satisfied a need or a desire, but also gone beyond what he or she has been programmed to do and achieved something unexpected, perhaps something even unimagined before. Enjoyment is characterized by this forward movement, by a sense of novelty, of accomplishment. On the other hand, feeling pleasure doesn't require any challenge. You can get pleasure from your morning coffee, you can get pleasure from drugs, you can get pleasure from procrastinating and watching Netflix instead of engaging in the work you're supposed to be doing. But enjoyment and satisfaction come through effort and attention. Mihaly goes on to add, "A person can feel pleasure without any effort, but it is impossible to enjoy a tennis game, a book, or a conversation unless attention is fully concentrated on the activity." He uses the example of a child. During the first few years of a child's life, they are like little learning machines, as he calls them. They're trying things out. They're speaking new words. You can see the concentration on their face when they're trying to play with a toy or figure out how something works. This is effortful enjoyment. It's good challenge that they're engaging in. This enjoyment and deep satisfaction is why people get addicted to hard things like ultra-marathon running, serial entrepreneurship, fighting, and so forth. While these things are challenging and painful, they seem worthwhile and they are enjoyable. A life of pleasure without enjoyment and satisfaction and strain and struggle is an empty life. Take a look at the people who've endlessly pursued hedonism only to end up more miserable than they were beforehand. As Viktor Frankl writes, what man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. So we need challenge because it creates the enjoyment and satisfaction that makes life worth living. But we also need it because it produces momentum, motivation, and energy. Without sufficient challenge, motivation wanes. Momentum becomes inertia. Excitement and exhilaration cease to exist. What do I mean? Well, we have this innate desire for homeostasis. I've talked about this a lot in previous videos. And because we have this desire for homeostasis, to stay in the comfort zone, to stay in a state of non-movement, of inertia, it's extremely difficult to expend more energy than necessary. If you can take the path of least resistance, then you usually will. When you lack challenge, when you lack ambitious enough goals, then you will naturally cap your energy and your drive to do things. It'll be sort of a subconscious process. If your current goal, for example, is something that you know for certain that you can achieve and you don't find it challenging, then why would you expect to push yourself and work really hard and grow, right? You don't need to. There's no demand for you to do that. And when I think back to the times in my life where I was most fulfilled and energized and I had the most momentum, they were times of challenge. Whether it's the time I wrote a book in 30 days, the time I was hiring my first employee, going on long backcountry hunts and hikes, walking for miles on end, or pushing through difficult projects, they're all a result of this forward-leaning embrace of worthwhile challenge, which was deeply rewarding. Conversely, the times in my life where I felt the opposite, where I felt the lowest, felt like I haven't had momentum, felt stuck in inertia, are the times in my life where I'm not embracing challenge but should be, where I've rested for longer than necessary, where I'm stuck overthinking, avoiding the work that I know I need to do, where I'm setting goals that I know I can achieve with certainty and don't challenge me sufficiently. So challenge produces momentum, it produces motivation, and it also helps with activation energy, the energy that's required to start something, pursue something, get you from inertia, stasis to movement, right? Imagine if I told you right now that we were going on a 16-hour hike together. We would be walking for 16 hours in the hills, in the mountains with a heavy pack. Regardless of your fitness level, it's a difficult challenge, but it is something that you can push yourself to do. It'll just be painful. Your first instinct might be to reject it, to make excuses, but in this hypothetical scenario, you don't have a choice. You're doing it. You're committed. And once you're mentally committed to that challenge, you know you're going to do it, and you know it's going to be damn hard, something happens. You get this burst of energy. You get this burst of sort of motivation. Your mind goes from dreading the challenge to thinking, bring it on, let's do this. And so you sort of mentally, almost spiritually rise to the challenge that's in front of you. And there's an energy that comes from that I think is extremely powerful. And it's very hard to get in any other way. For example, you wouldn't get that same burst of energy if I just said to you, hey, let's go on a 30-minute walk along the beach. There's nothing challenging about that. So you don't need to build yourself up and rise up to it. It doesn't really produce this immense activation energy. This is also why it's easier sometimes to procrastinate on easier tasks than harder tasks, because challenge creates its own activation energy. And when you don't have challenge in the work, like if it's just responding to emails, then it's like easy to just put off because it's not exciting, doesn't seem interesting. It's kind of like the boring, easy work. That's also why I think the best productivity hack is to find work that interests you and challenges you. That will solve way more procrastination problems than any tactic or hack or software can. Not everyone has the luxury to do that, but it is something you should work towards, to find work that interests you and challenges you. There is a caveat that I must mention, which is if something is too challenging, then you will avoid it. That's why I keep saying sufficiently challenging. We'll talk about the golden mean or ratio of challenge to competency near the end of this video. Finally, the reason challenge is so important is because it increases confidence and perceived capability. I remember the first time I went backcountry hunting here in New Zealand, up in the mountains. I went out with 2 other friends and the plan was to do an easy sort of day hunt to hopefully find an animal, a deer, and carry the meat back out. Well, I can tell you one thing, it was not easy. It actually turned out to be one of the most physically challenging days of my life, harder than the mountain marathon that I'd done a few months earlier. The walking up and down steep mountains with 50 pounds of meat in the backpack, crossing through ice cold rivers and getting numb feet, try not to slip down terrain in wet conditions made for a painful experience. It was hard. I wanted it to be over. But having done that and looking back on that, I know that I'm way more capable than what I give myself credit for, physically and mentally, just in the ability to push through pain and challenge. When you pursue extremely hard challenges, or in my case, you pursue what you think is a normal challenge that ends up becoming an extremely hard challenge, you raise your internal sense of capability. You develop this self-confidence that can carry you through future challenges. Not just carry you through those challenges, but help you rise up and set bigger goals, knowing that you are capable of achieving them. It drives you to pursue harder things. And as we just looked at, it's fulfilling anyway. I remember getting back in the car at like 10 p.m. after we'd finished that hike, that hunt, and I sat down and I said to the other guys, this has been one of the best days of my life. So we've looked at why we need challenge and what it does for us, but how can we actively pursue it? What are some strategies and some principles for implementing more challenge into our lives? Now, you might be watching this and you're thinking, Sam, I am pushed to the limit. I cannot increase the amount of challenge in my life. I'm like running at 110%. If that's the case, then you probably don't need to watch the rest of this video. Like, keep doing what you're doing. But what if you lack challenge? What if you've been stuck in inertia for a bit too long, stuck in the comfort zone for a while, and you feel like you're becoming weaker? Well, let's fix that. I'm going to share 3 strategies or challenges that you can pursue, followed by 3 principles to live a more challenge-oriented life every day. So the first challenge or strategy is called the Misogi Challenge. The Misogi Challenge is based on the Shinto practice of Misogi, where you purify yourself through ritual cleansing, often by standing under cold waterfalls. The modern adaptation of this is that you pursue a challenge or endeavor once a year that is so beyond your perceived limits that it resets your perspective on life and makes everything else seem more manageable in comparison. For me, this was the day hunt. It's not actually something that I planned as a Misogi challenge. I didn't think I'm going to go and do this as a Misogi challenge, but it was so hard that everything else after that just became a lot easier. Here's how Jesse Itzler describes it. Misogi is about taking on something that's so difficult, so far beyond what you think you can do, that it forces you to dig deep and find a new level of strength and resilience. So it needs to be challenging. And Harvard-trained physician and performance coach Marcus Elliott gives a more specific idea of how challenging it should be. He says, take on challenges that radically expand your sense of what's possible. There are just 2 rules. You have a 50% chance of success at best, and it doesn't kill you. Does it make your jaw drop? That's a good litmus test for whether something can be a Misogi or not. So think of something hard and then make it even harder. Maybe you run a marathon without training. Maybe you go for a walk for 16 hours straight. Maybe you do something like the David Goggins 48-hour challenge, where you run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. Maybe you climb a mountain peak. Maybe you do some sort of cold water immersion or swim in a ice lake, something like that. It doesn't necessarily need to be physical either, but I do think physical challenges are the fastest path to growing mentally, to building mental toughness. But I'm sure you could undertake some sort of mental Misogi too. Maybe you work for 24 hours straight or 36 hours straight or something like that. The second challenge or strategy is to take a goal that you have right now. And if you don't have one, then set one and then double it or triple it. What do I mean? Well, let's say that your goal is to build a business in 12 months to get it to a point where it can sustain your lifestyle. Make it 6 months. Maybe your goal is to earn 20% more income next year. Make it 40%. Just arbitrarily double it. Make it bigger. Something interesting happens when you do this. First, you don't want to do it because you instantly think, well, I can't achieve that. Hence why I set the goal at, this mark, at this number or whatever. But then you do it anyway, because what's the harm? You fail, but you achieve your goal, your initial goal anyway. You probably go far beyond it. As cheesy as it is, you shoot for the moon, you land among the stars. The other thing it does is it raises your activation energy so much more, like we talked about before. When you set that goal, when you change your 12-month timeline to 6 months, you instantly start thinking, well, I need to work fast. I need to do this differently. I need to work harder. I need to get up at 5 a.m. and do it this way instead. It forces you to think differently. It forces you to think question of, if you have a 10-year plan of how to get somewhere, you should ask, why can't you do this in 6 months? It forces you to think about your goal, about your problem, about your situation differently. The third one, and this is sort of some cloaked, shameless self-promotion here, is to do a work sprint. Some of the most enjoyable times of my life have been when I'm engaged in large volumes of intense, focused work on one project over a short time period. I call these work sprints. And I run a cohort by the same name. You can check it out at worksprint.co, or there's a link in the description. You can do this yourself, but the benefit to doing it in the cohort is that there's community, there's accountability, there's training, all this other stuff. But anyway, here's how it works. You set one project or goal over a period of 2 to 4 weeks. It should be challenging. It should involve some uncertainty. If you know for sure you can achieve it, then it's not challenging enough. Second, you want to optimize your schedule for massive volume and intensity of work. If that means dropping some responsibilities that you can drop, then do so. If it means socializing less, then do so. And then third, you need to work extremely hard every day with focus. The goal with a work sprint is not just to push forward an important project or goal to achieve something. It's also to prove to yourself that you're more capable than you think. In its own way, it's like a Misogi challenge, except instead of it being 1 day, it's 2 to 4 weeks. There's something that happens to you as an individual when you work with this intensity and consistency over a period of time like this. When you work harder than you ever have before. As Alex Hormozi said, I think on the Chris Williamson podcast, the work works on you more than you work on it. There is value in just doing a lot of work. It changes you. Anyway, if you want to do this alongside a bunch of other ambitious action takers, then make sure you check out Worksprint. We will be running the next cohort soon. So those are sort of the 3 challenges. Misogi challenge, do one extremely hard thing 1 day per year, makes everything else easier. Double or triple your goal, shorten the timeline, halve it, raise the bar, increase the number, whatever you have to do, make it twice as ambitious, 3 times as ambitious, however much you want. And then do a work sprint. Take a period of time, 2 to 4 weeks, and just dive in, do a lot of work, focus on one thing. You'll be surprised at what happens. These challenges that I've just mentioned are worthwhile, but you also want to live a challenge-oriented life. You don't just want certain events in your life every now and again, a Misogi here, a work sprint here. You want to generally increase the amount of challenge in your life on a daily basis. So here are 3 principles to help you do just that. The first is to avoid incrementalism. Incrementalism, in the context of this topic, is the idea that you should slowly and incrementally increase challenge in your life. Instead of signing up and training for a marathon, run a half marathon first. Instead of doing a 4-week work sprint, do a 2-week one first. There is some value to this way of thinking. For example, if you're extremely unhealthy or you have a heart condition, then running a marathon next week might actually be life-threatening. It might be a really bad idea. And it might make more sense to work up to it, right? Or pursue some other sort of challenge. It is a useful philosophy in certain contexts, but it also slows you down immensely in other contexts and can hold you back. It comes back to the double your goal challenge, right? It's like, how can you make a quantum leap? How can you get exponential results in life? And often the answer to that is simply to do it differently, to skip the incremental part and to just aim a lot higher and challenge yourself more. You can avoid incrementalism in a good way by setting goals and projects that have outsized returns if completed. Usually these goals and projects feel less comfortable to you. They might have a higher level of uncertainty, but a goal that has 10x return potential but a 50% chance of success is a much better bet than a goal that has a 1.5x return potential but a 100% chance of success. One has the potential to radically transform your life. The other, not so much. It's incremental. And often pursuing the 10x goal, pursuing the non-incremental thing, it's usually more challenging than pursuing the incremental thing, but it's not like 10 times more challenging. You'll hear people say who've built like massive businesses after they build small ones. It's like, it's not that much harder. Like it is harder, but it's not 10 times harder, even if it's 10 times the size or 10 times the ambition. Another key here is to just not lie to yourself. To ask yourself, do I need to do this incrementally? Do I need to build up to it? Or is that just what I'm telling myself? Can I just like shoot for this thing straight away without all these excuses in mind? And then embrace incrementalism where it makes sense to do so. When I say avoid incrementalism, I don't mean avoid it altogether. I mean avoid it in the process of setting goals and challenges and just where it's a kind of useless thing to do. Let's go back to the marathon example. You can avoid incrementalism by signing up to the marathon instead of the half when everyone's telling you to sign up to the half first. But when it comes to the training, you do want to embrace incrementalism because if you just start running like 10 miles a day, starting at zero, you're going to get injured, you're going to hurt yourself, and you're probably not going to achieve that goal. So incrementalism matters in the right context. The second principle is to fight stasis every day. Even if you're someone who's motivated by challenge more than others, there's still a tendency to fall victim to stasis. The body and mind want to conserve energy. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself stuck in inertia and hating it. And so you want to do something every day that challenges you and keeps you out and away from this stasis and this inertia. For me, that's doing the hard, deep work every morning, first thing, that moves me towards my goals. It's doing it with focus, with intensity, and with high standards, not cutting corners. It's exercising every day, moving my body, straining it, doing the hard thing. I know that if I do these two things, I'm not going to fall back into stasis. Like, these are the two pillars, right? So do something every day that keeps you out of stasis. And then finally, the third principle is to find the golden mean between challenge and competency, or challenge and capability. A quote from Mihai, the author of Flow. Enjoyment appears at the boundary between boredom and anxiety, when the challenges are just balanced with the person's capacity to act. As much as you can, you want to operate within the right level of challenge. If it's too easy, you are more likely to procrastinate, feel bored, and lack the activation energy to do the work. If it's too challenging and you lack the competency or capability to achieve it, then you'll also find that you avoid doing the work. And so you want to find where that golden mean is for yourself between challenge and capability. And one signal that you can use to find this, because it does involve a bit of experimentation, but one signal is when you enter a flow state. I do recommend reading Mihai's book. It's fantastic. But when you enter a flow state, it's usually because you're balancing the challenge and capability. So to wrap this up, what did we learn? We learned that we need challenge. It makes life fulfilling. It produces momentum, motivation, energy, flow. It pulls us out of stasis. It increases our perceived and actual capability. And then to pursue challenge, we should consider doing a Misogi challenge. One thing, one day a year that makes everything else easier. Double or triple our goal ambition. Do a work sprint. And then the principles are to avoid incrementalism, to fight stasis every day, and to find the golden mean between challenge and capability. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.